premium for information in all formats, not just data. What will your office do to address these concerns?
Sure. So one of the things we're looking at is a context-driven government. Rather than the old way of thinking about the public sector has been that we connect people to agencies and bureaucracies rather than services. So the federal government currently has over 24,000 websites. Imagine if you're looking for a service, how taxing that is for an individual to connect to a service. And traditionally, the role of the CIOs, and this is a function of self-image of the CIO too, I would argue, has been to just focus on silicon and zeros and ones, rather than to look at the power of technology and leveraging technology to fundamentally transform the way the government works. And by context-driven, what we need to do is recognize that if you look at certain sites, whether it's Craigslist or Facebook or a number of other sites, they have more users. Let's take Facebook, for example. We're over 138 million users versus the number of hits an agency website would get. So the question for us from a government perspective is to figure out how do we get government services embedded in those social networks so that with the digital economy, we're not going back and architecting systems and the way we deploy services the same way and through the same thinking as we were with the physical world and the limitations of the physical world. So we have a great opportunity here, and that's one of the challenges for the CIO community is to look at that $71 billion, rationalize it, but at the same time move it towards a context-driven government.
I think one of our other questions then is about one of the things we hear in our community is concern about that vast amount of money that's going to purchase technology, and I understand the context-driven, but are there opportunities through the budget process to bring agencies, and I know you're not the budget officer, but to bring agencies to be more transparent, to take that, what seems to us on the outside, an enormous amount of money, maybe not so much in the government, but on the outside it is, and turn that around to get those CIOs to not just think about the context, but to spend some of that money in providing information.
Sure, and I think part of that has to do with the DNA of the government and making sure that the CIOs share a philosophy of an open and transparent government and recognize that technology is one element, it's not the solution. And how do we ensure that it's one, baked into the DNA of the government? As you can see, the president is committed to that. Secondly, when we look at the procurement process, ensuring that we bake that up front into how we procure technologies, how we procure solutions, with a default setting of ensuring that we will favor solutions that provide greater transparency and open government rather than solutions that are going to close down information. And we want to make sure that we favor solutions that are going to make it easier for the public to be able to access how their government works. And a worldview that it's about we the people. The government belongs to we the people, and we need to ensure that people actually have access and understand how their government works, and all the processes throughout the federal government, we need to ensure that we're actually shining sunlight and leveraging technology to make that happen.
I guess a follow-on is the sunlight and shining the sunlight, but what are the carrots and sticks to actually get the CIOs to do this? It's wonderful, and I'll just say that that's what the administration wants them to do, but what are, like I said, the carrots and sticks to actually get them to do it?
So, from my personal experience, what I've found is transparency is not just good government. It fundamentally changes the way you deploy technology and solutions. So you can see a 60–70% X drop in cost, because now the government doesn't have to deploy a solution on its own. Just through the data.gov model, we could engage the public to help us build solutions and solve some of the biggest problems in the federal government. Whether those are specialized in healthcare, in education, or in public safety, you can actually engage the public to deploy solutions that not only are lower in cost, but far more innovative. you're looking at a federal workforce of about 4 million people plus, but if you can tap into the ingenuity and the innovation of 300 million Americans, we could fundamentally change the way we roll out technologies.
Okay, and that leads us in very nicely actually to Beth, the participation and collaboration and transparency. Beth, you have a lead role in development of the Open Government Directive called for by the President. Can you tell us some of the, something about the kinds of things the President hopes to achieve through this directive, and with, for this audience, a special focus on the transparency aspect?
Sure. First, let me say thank you very much for having me, for having all of us here today. It is such a pleasure, particularly during Sunshine Week, to be among such an engaged, enthusiastic, and committed group of people who share a deep belief in and commitment to, and have worked for many years on pushing the agenda of transparency that's really, I think, informed and led to the events we've seen over the last couple of weeks. That started even before the announcement on January 21st of the President's memorandum on transparency. Throughout the campaign, I think we saw the President's commitment to really trying to transform the way the government works, trying to bring new transparency to the effort. And that was signaled and reinforced then during the transition process, when I had the pleasure to serve with several of the people on this panel in the infamous Tigger group, where we did It Was Fun. That's why we called it Tigger. And it was really a tremendous opportunity to be asked to focus on specific these issues of how we bring reform to government, how we bring greater transparency to the process. I also want to apologize at the outset for my cold. That I have simulcast going on in my head. It's not the webcast, is happening in my own head, so I apologize for that. But what we're hoping to do here is really, as the memorandum I think puts it best, to try to drive 3 values into government to even greater extent than we've seen before: transparency, participation, and collaboration that have been mentioned. This is really about trying to bring innovation not only to technology more generally, but to the way that the public sector works, makes decisions, and makes policies. So that when we articulate a policy priority, whether it's improving the quality of education in this country, or trying to develop clean energy proposals and improve our environment, or trying to really affect the other agendas, items that the President has and the administration has right front and center, first and foremost of which is, of course, the economy and creating new economic opportunity and jobs, that we innovate in the way we make the policies around the economy, education, healthcare, the environment, energy, and all the areas in which the public sector is now working, so that we bring about the most effective solutions to the tremendous problems that face us today. So in terms of what we're hoping to achieve in these 3 areas, I think I'm only echoing what Vivek has said about transparency and some of the flagship initiatives that he and the CIO Council are driving, epitomized by projects like recovery.gov, by projects like data.gov. We are engaged similarly in a parallel process to try to drive now the policy thinking that will help drive us towards greater transparency across the government, and help us to really align our vision for greater transparency with the practices and the way that we've worked. This will not be a simple or easy or a quick win. It is not an easy process, and it's not one that we complete by May 21st, the end of our 120-day mandate that we've been given by the President. It's really only the beginning of a process to change the culture of trying to drive greater data about the workings of government, and also the data and information of the government out into the open, make it available online, and make it available for download and access to citizens, so that we can create greater transparency and accountability, and also create the kind of economic opportunity I think that you mentioned by releasing data online. I know there's a focus on transparency, but let me mention also participation and collaboration, if I might. Because the transparency effort is really about also trying to create opportunities for civic engagement and participation early in the policymaking process, so that we can leverage as many of the minds, as you talked about, trying to bring everybody's work to bear. The President has talked about sort of all hands on deck approach, trying to drive the expertise of the American public into the decision-making processes in government. And so that's where we're also looking and collaborating on how we think about using technology to improve the way that we make decisions and to get the benefit of the best expertise that we can. I might also point out that last week the President also came out with a very major pronouncement on scientific integrity, and that's very much, I think, part and parcel of this initiative, is trying to look at how we drive better scientific information of the highest quality into decision making and foster new opportunities for civic engagement and participation. And finally, collaboration. And all of these are driven by transparency and getting data out there and putting it in the hands of people. is the ability to collaborate both across government more effectively and between